John Manley is a former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. He's now a senior business advisor at Bennett Jones. Hi, Mr. Manley. Great to have you back on the program.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about what we might hear or what we should hear from the government tomorrow when the current finance minister delivers a speech addressing inflation. But first, just as a former finance minister, I wonder how concerned you are about the state of the economy at this moment.
I'm very concerned about it because inflation is rampant and central banks are doing what central banks do in inflationary times, and they're ratcheting up interest rates. That means our chances of a soft landing in our economy are becoming increasingly remote, which means we could be heading into a recession.
I was speaking with Doug Porter the other evening on the program, the chief economist for BMO, and he put the odds of a recession in 18 months at 50-50. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think so. You never know. I mean, there are lots of factors out there, but most of them edge to the negative. You know, we've got an ongoing war in Ukraine, which is impacting prices in a lot of commodities, including energy. But also impacting food and food distribution and the nutrients that need to be used as fertilizer. Those are external pressures that we don't know how that's going to play out. We have the slowdown in China because of their COVID policies. And by the way, don't forget about COVID. It's always able to make a comeback. It's been a very resilient, you might say, virus with lots of different faces to it. I can't think of any of the possibilities that edge to the upside. I think everything is kind of negative right now.
So what does that mean? I'll start first from a policy perspective and then ask you about it from a communications perspective, but from a policy perspective for the federal government.
Well, they don't have a lot of options, really. I mean, the Bank of Canada is independent. By the way, that is a critically important feature of our system. It needs to be preserved. But that independence means that they will be raising interest rates. And we saw it in the U.S. today, so expect more to come. About the most that the government can do is try to address the segment of our population that is most directly impacted, that are having those people that are having trouble putting food on the table or, conducting their normal lives, are ones that perhaps the government can try to help. If they do something like a overall tax reduction, that's not targeted enough. And what the bank is trying to do by raising interest rates is to suppress demand a little bit, especially when supply is constrained in so many areas. But some people are going to find real hardship in this, and they're the ones that governments usually need to step in and help.
Does that necessitate anything new, or what's anticipated tomorrow, for example, from Minister Freeland is kind of a recapping of what the government already has to offer those segments of the population that you just highlighted. So, for example, benefits that are indexed to inflation, or the Canada Workers Benefit, the housing benefit, things like that. That the minister, my understanding is plans to talk about, but nothing new really in that suite.
Those are all good things, but the problem with them is that they lag because the increase in each of those only happens after the inflation numbers have been proven out for a period of time. So if you're looking to do something right away, then you need to do something a little differently, even if it just means accelerating some of those increases and working out the details later. Because I think we're in for a rough ride here. There's no other way to look at it when you just look at even the food supply situation and the impact that will have on basic cost of living, everything from bread and pasta right through to all the things that ripple off of that.
I think against the backdrop of that, it's fair to say that Canadians are really consumed with a lot of this stuff right now. They're worried about not only the price of what's happening right now, but what those rising interest rates mean for their mortgage, and then the possibility of a recession and what that could mean. From a political / communications perspective, as someone who spent a long time in government, how big of a vulnerability for the Liberals right now is this?
Well, fortunately for them, they're not facing an election in the next year and a half. Unfortunately for President Biden, his party goes to the polls this November, and I think that's going to be very unfortunate timing. These things usually take a bit of time to work their way through. Some of this inflation, and I think it's important for Canadians to remember that this is not unique to Canada. This is a global phenomenon right now. But some of those supply challenges will begin to be satisfied as China comes back online, as we get more certainty around oil production and other energy supplies. So by the time we get to the 2025 federal election, things could look quite a bit different. But I think that in the meantime, it's going to be important for the government to show that they actually understand how hard this is for people, how impactful it is. And they are going to get a lot of heat for what some on the opposition side will say was their irresponsibility in allowing this to happen in the first place. I personally think that might be a little bit unfair. But we did have a lot of spending during the downturn. The amount that was put into replacement of lost income was greater than the amount of income that was actually lost. That over time can be inflationary. But I think the real impact here is going to be absorbed by the time we get to 2025.
Okay, Mr. Manley, I'll leave it there. Great pleasure to have you back. Hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Vashi. Bye-bye.
Meanwhile, on this side of the border, Canada's central bank is also trying to address the soaring cost of living. It raised the overnight rate to 1.5% earlier this month and signaled more hikes are on the way. Inflation in Canada right now is close to 7%. That's a 31-year high, and new numbers about consumer prices are expected to be released next week. Jimmy Jean is the chief economist with Desjardins. He's with us from Montreal. Mr. Jean, good to have you back on the program. Thanks for making the time.
Pleasure, as always.
Before we get to the Canadian situation, let me start on that rate hike out of the Fed in the U.S. Did the size of it or scope of it surprise you at all? They kind of signaled it was coming Monday.
Absolutely. The minute we saw that whisper in the Wall Street Journal, it's very rare that they would send some false signals. So it was pretty much baked in from that point forward. But Chair Powell was very clear about the rationale for that change in view. And it was really that inflation number that we saw for the U.S. last Friday. So another print that was above expectations. And the hope was that we would start to see signs that inflation was actually peaking, but we didn't quite see that. And they were pretty clear that once, as long as we don't have like a sequence of reassuring prints on inflation, they will have to keep on that forceful tack. And that's what today's decision illustrates.
So let me ask you to what degree that is mirrored here in Canada, because I can remember conversations a few months ago on this program with a variety of people who all thought perhaps the peak was coming as well on inflation. Those inflation numbers, that the CPI index for May, will be released on Wednesday, exactly 1 week from today. What are your expectations there?
So we're not expecting inflation to peak just yet. Those are going to be numbers for the month of May. And we remember that was a month where gasoline prices spiked. They're still very elevated, but you had that leap higher in May. So that's going to be reflected in those numbers. And as a result, we think inflation will move from 6.8% it was in April to show a 7.1% print for May. So we're still very much going to be in that kind of environment. The Bank of Canada has been also, it's admitted that it had inflation wrong, that the inflation has kept overshooting its predictions. It's even going to release in July sort of its errors and why they happen. But it's not just the Bank of Canada, it's pretty much everyone in this profession that has been caught off guard We've never seen a situation where we're coming back from a pandemic. We have a war. We have continued lockdowns and supply chain issues and a very tight labor market. All those things all together, there's no model, there's no judgment that can really size this properly. So that's the challenge that central bankers, but about every economist is dealing with.
In particular, where the central bank is concerned rather, and central banks more generally, what do you I understand the sort of uniqueness of the situation broadly, but do you think it was an underestimation of the degree to which the demand side of things would come roaring back that really led to those overall underestimations about inflation?
I think actually that's interesting because if we go back to January, on our end, our expectation was that we would see demand from services pick up with the reopening of the economy, with the vaccination that was very advanced. We were looking for that shift in the stages of pandemic to lead to stronger price pressures domestically and in services. But we were also anticipating to see the supply chain issues in particular start to wane, and energy prices as well sort of stabilize, which would moderate the inflationary pressures. That's the part that really hasn't panned out. Instead of seeing that, we've seen the war, and we've seen the effect of the pandemic, especially in China. So continuing to stress those supply chains that were already obviously very stressed. And so you have both goods and services that are not just very high, but accelerating. So it's just hitting on every corner. And especially the war in Ukraine, what that brings is that other element, which is food. Food prices were already very strong, but this has accelerated the trend even further. So for necessities in particular, that's where inflation is very strong right now. And really, when you look at Canada, for example, you have about 70% of components that are rising above 3%. And 3% is the highest the Bank of Canada is able to tolerate as part of its mandate. So effectively, inflation right now is out of control. It's a crisis. It's a crisis in Canada, in the U.S., and just about everywhere.
So let me attempt to bring it home to people who are watching and wondering what that means for a couple of things. Let's start on the price of what they're buying, because like you point out, it's very expensive right now to buy food, to fill up your car, to buy a house, to find shelter, all of those things. If we're looking at uncertainty, especially around the supply side of things, because of, let's say, even the war in Ukraine, which, my goodness, could go on for a really long time, how difficult is it to determine or to be able to tell them how long people watching tonight are going to be facing those elevated prices for?
Absolutely. That's been the big challenge here. You have the war, you have also groceries, rents that are spiking. You have the fastest pace for rents since the early 1990s. And what we're also seeing is wages are picking up. That last number we had for the month of May has shown a pretty big spike in wage growth. And that runs the risk of those wage increases being financed by essentially businesses having to increase prices further in order to protect their profit margins. So that's why it's been very difficult to precisely put a top to this. And we think by the end of the year we should start to see signs that at least it's peaking. And I really like how Jerome Powell put it today. The first thing you have to see before inflation even comes down is it's got to peak, and we haven't seen that yet. So that's the first thing we're going to be looking for. I do think that higher interest rates, combined with a slowdown that is well underway now in the housing market — we've had new numbers to this effect today — those will ultimately bring down demand and bring down inflation. But those things take time before they're fully reflected in data. So it might take another good 3 to 6 months before we see more convincing signs. And until we get that, central banks are going to be inclined to do even more to kind of assert their credibility that they're on top of this.
Okay, thanks very much. Very helpful information. Appreciate the analysis as always. Jimmy Jean is the chief economist and strategist with Desjardins. Hi, Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.